right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're very excited to have you all here. We're going to give it a couple of minutes just to make sure that people are popping on, and then we will go ahead and get started. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started now. We got a pretty full packed agenda, so want to get sort of right to it. First, go through some introductions to our guest speakers for today. Then we'll dive into Solar Battery 101, so everything you need to know, marketplace insights, and then we will hear from our solar expert on the call. And then, of course, we want to get around to all of your questions and answers. The very first introduction, I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Christina Zagami. I am a senior researcher here at EnergySage and will be hosting our call today. And here are our speakers for this resiliency webinar. First up, we have Brian Cormier. He is one of our energy advisors on the EnergySage team. Emily Walker is our very own senior researcher and writer, very educated on all things solar batteries. And last but certainly not least, we have our guest speaker for today, who is Martyna Kowalczyk. She's joining us from Texas. She's the CEO of SolarTime USA. So we're very grateful and thankful that Martyna is taking time to speak with you all today and to share all of her wisdom. Like I said, we have a very full packed agenda, so we'll go ahead and get started. Brian, I believe you are up first.
Thank you for the introduction, Christina, and thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I am one of our senior energy advisors here at EnergySage, and I get the pleasure of spending my days talking to homeowners about the positives and benefits of installing solar and battery storage to their homes. And in my 2.5 years here, I've noticed a trend over the last 12 months where the conversation around battery storage and whether or not it's appropriate for them has really ticked up. So first thing that I think is really important to understand when folks are considering solar, and most people don't realize this, is that when you install solar to your home and the grid goes down, you actually lose access to your ability to capture and utilize that power. What you would need to do in order to make sure that in the event of a grid outage, anytime the power is down, you would actually need to pair your solar panels with some form of battery storage for that resiliency during outages so you can continue to maintain that solar energy. Obviously, the core function of solar batteries is the ability to store energy that you're producing at home for future use. And we're going to go into a couple instances as to when you may want to use that energy. And when you install battery storage with your solar system, your panels aren't actually producing enough electricity, you can either pull from the grid, or in this case, you'll have your batteries to be able to access energy that you've stored there as long as it's charged. A frequent question that comes up when people are considering batteries is why not maybe install a traditional generator? And while traditional generators definitely have some advantages, such as lower upfront costs and access, say, to power at night when your system isn't producing, and the ability to power with more traditional fuel sources like propane, diesel, gas-powered home generators, there are some disadvantages to that when you compare them to solar batteries. Some of those disadvantages to a traditional generator could be the environmental impact, right? These generators are relying upon fossil fuels, which releases things like CO2 and other harmful greenhouse gases while they're operating. They can be loud. They can create odor pollution. There's also a limited use, right? When you think about a traditional generator, most of the time they're sitting idle. right? You're only using them in blackout situations. So when you think about a long-term investment, it's not always the greatest option to maybe install a generator versus solar batteries. And then one of the last considerations is the maintenance of a traditional generator. These pieces of equipment require ongoing maintenance, things like servicing, fuel storage, regular refueling. Whereas with solar batteries, right, there are a lot of benefits to them, right? Sustainable energy use. You're creating the energy at home from the sun and have a clean, renewable energy source to back up your power, lower overall operating costs over the life of that battery. They're quite quiet in comparison to a traditional generator, and they do require less maintenance. And that says nothing about the potential incentives and rebates that may be available in your state with your utility to help offset the cost of installation and equipment. So again, pros and cons, but we are starting to see a lot of the pros for solar batteries outweigh a traditional generator option. If you want to switch over. The next question that I get is, how much do batteries cost? And it's always important when you're thinking about this question to have a really in-depth conversation with someone like Martyna, an expert, because I have to say that solar battery costs, they vary dramatically across brands and the state that you're in. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Every homeowner has their own individual storage goals when it comes to installing a battery, right? So you have to think about things like the battery quality, the storage amount. Are you someone who's looking for a whole home backup solution? Or are you maybe just looking to back up a couple of critical loads in the event of an outage? That's a factor as to what type of battery you're going to ultimately go with and how much it's going to cost. Also, you have to consider things like the inverter type, the current electrical setup and infrastructure in your home today, the solar panel equipment that you're pairing that battery with, right? That's going to play a big role as to which battery and how much it's going to cost. And then lastly, like I touched on earlier, depending on where you live in the country, there may be some very generous state-based, utility-based incentives that all factor into what does the battery cost, which is why you need to have that type of scoping conversation with an expert like Martyna. To give you a really specific example, the typical American home needs about 11.4 kilowatt hours of battery storage to provide backup for the most critical electrical devices in their home. Now, big thing to note there is we're talking about those critical electrical loads, the thing you can't go without, or the things you can't go without. In 2024, a battery with that level of capacity cost about $9,000 after federal credits. And that information has been collated based on thousands of quotes that we've been able to provide homeowners through EnergySage. And thankfully for homeowners, this is the lowest battery pricing that we've ever seen on the platform. And with continued adoption, continued interest from homeowners, we do anticipate those costs will hopefully continue to drop over the coming years. And then lastly, who should get a battery? Every project is its own. You may be in a situation where a battery isn't a good fit for you and your family, so you should never feel forced to go ahead with equipment that may not be necessary for you. But if you fall into one of these four buckets, it might be worth having a serious conversation pairing your future solar with battery storage. And what are those buckets? It's for folks who are really concerned about emergency backup power. For some folks in the country, they may have experienced this acutely lately. We had two really horrific weather events over the last few weeks here, really driving the interest in maintaining power in the event of that inclement weather, which unfortunately is becoming more and more regular and more powerful. So that's a first case use for someone where a battery might be a really great fit. There are also folks in the country where they may not have a really good one-to-one net metering program. And net metering is the process of selling your excess energy back to your utility for a bill credit for future usage. Unfortunately, we've seen also a trend of utilities, states rolling back their net metering programs. So the installation of battery storage not only gives you that protection and resiliency in the event of an outage, it allows you to store that excess energy to offset what is a potentially lowered net metering opportunity in your area. Kind of going hand in hand with that, we're also seeing some complex utility rates. So time of use rates, demand charge rates, basically your utility companies charging you more for the energy and the times of the day where everybody's using it the most. that's a really good case for a battery because, again, you'll be able to access and discharge that battery to help offset what might be spiking energy rates during those key times of the day. And lastly, I've touched on it a few times. There are, in different parts of the country with different utilities, some very generous battery incentives. Your solar professional that you're working with on that part of the project will be able to help you scope those out, take advantage, and apply for those programs. So if you fall into one of these four categories, it's a very good idea for you to have a conversation about battery storage. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Martyna. Really appreciate your time today.
Sorry, actually, I'm going to take this next section.
I was going to say, I think it's
Oh, my apologies.
Emily.
Chatted it off to the wrong person. Sorry about that.
No worries at all. Like Christina said, I'm Emily Walker. I'm a senior researcher on the team at EnergySage here. So I recently co-authored our marketplace report, which we release every 6 months. The most recent one was published just a couple weeks ago in October. It covers the first 6 months of 2024, and it primarily provides analysis of EnergySage marketplace quote data. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some data from the marketplace report. I'm also going to talk about the resiliency survey that we ran over the summer with homeowners who actually have purchased batteries through our marketplace. So that included about 70 respondents from spanning across 17 states in the US. So one of the first things I want to talk about is battery adoption among homeowners. We've long seen that people have been interested in batteries. So for reference, about 60% of people coming through EnergySage and getting quotes for solar have requested batteries since we added batteries to our marketplace back in 2020. Today, we're seeing slightly higher interest in batteries at about 72%, but generally it's remained high for quite some time. What has increased is the actual attachment rate or the adoption of batteries with solar. So a lot of people were interested in them, but then when it actually came to decide whether they wanted them or not, they decided maybe it's not the right fit for me. But now more people are saying, no, I actually do want a battery. And so some of the factors that are playing into that are lower battery pricing, popularity and launch of the Tesla Powerwall 3, different policy changes, like Brian mentioned, the shift away from net metering, and some really attractive incentives. So this data is based on our marketplace report and explains some of the motivations for battery interest. It kind of goes along with what Brian was talking about who should get a battery. So we're seeing homeowner reported storage motivation coming primarily from utility bill savings, self-supply, and backup power. It's pretty evenly split across these three things, as you can see. But in a resiliency survey, we also heard a couple of interesting anecdotes from people who said that they wanted batteries because they have experienced a really bad power outage in the past. So we asked some of these people to elaborate on their experiences, and they shared some interesting stories. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of them. One respondent said that they lost power for 5 days during a hurricane. And at EnergySage, we often see spikes in solar and battery interest following major weather events. So for example, in the week following Hurricane Beryl this summer, storage interest jumped 13% among EnergySage shoppers, not just in Texas, but nationwide. A couple of respondents also indicated that their homes were fully or mostly electric, which makes power outages pretty dire. One said during a cold snap, they were left without heat for 4 days. And another said they experienced an outage that lasted almost a full day and they lost everything in their freezer and they couldn't cook, clean, or filter water. So it might sound kind of obvious, but these stories really underscore that, you know, as homeowners, as we start to electrify more of our homes, resilience is just going to become increasingly more important. When we look at battery adoption by states, we can really see these motivations play out. So for California, about 70% of homeowners are adding a battery with their solar system. Some of the reasons are California has a pretty unstable grid, there's no one-to-one net metering policy, and there's time of use rates. In Texas, we also see pretty high attachment rate of 55%. That's due to extreme weather. Some utilities in Texas don't have one-to-one net metering. Some do, in which case maybe you don't need a battery. And a lot of utilities also have time of use rates here. Massachusetts tells a different story. As you can see, only about 9% of homeowners are opting for a battery with their solar panels. There's not very many out. I live in Massachusetts. We don't experience outages too often. We have a great, robust one-to-one net metering policy, but we do have some good incentives. So that's why some people are still opting to add a battery. In our resiliency survey, we also asked people what they're actually powering with their batteries. We were surprised that nearly half of respondents said their batteries were set up to back up their entire homes, given the costs associated with these types of systems. But about 40% indicated that their batteries back up part of their home, or they have an energy management system like a smart panel such as SPAN or Lumen that allows them to dynamically choose which loads their batteries power. So we asked these homeowners which devices they choose to power with their batteries, and we weren't surprised that, as you can see here, most said their fridge, their Wi-Fi, and their lights. But over 40% said they use their battery to back up their AC or their heating, while about 15% back up their sump pump. And given how important these appliances can be during outages, it makes sense, but it's still surprising because they're very power hungry and they can drain a battery pretty quickly. So overall, it's becoming clear that homeowners are placing more emphasis on wanting resiliency, not just for comfort, but also for safety and potential home damage. We also wanted to know how homeowners feel about the batteries they've installed, and in general, really, really favorable. About 3/4 of respondents said they were satisfied or very satisfied with their batteries. And almost 90% said they've never run out of battery power during an outage, which is worth repeating. Almost 90% said they've never run out of battery power during an outage. So if that's why you're interested in a battery, you can feel confident that people who have added batteries to their solar panels are glad they did so. This is particularly important as we're seeing more extreme weather. It's increasing in severity and frequency, like Brian mentioned. So just an anecdote, I talked to a North Carolina solar and storage installer yesterday, and he was explaining to me how solar plus battery setups fared really well during Hurricane Helene, and he's heard a lot of success stories coming out of it. We hear a lot of questions about how, if solar panels can withstand events like this, and he mentioned that, short of solar panels are so well adhered to the roof, especially when you have a really great installer, that short of a tornado coming through and really ripping off your roof, you're going to be in a good position when you have solar. It's also worth mentioning that sometimes there can be debris that will hit your roof in a hurricane, but even that is infrequent. And when it does, it usually only will take out a couple of panels. So you're still going to have that resiliency aspect as long as you have a battery with your solar panels. So overall, with resiliency becoming increasingly important and batteries making more sense for people financially, now is really a great time to look into adding a battery to your solar panel system. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Martyna.
Hi, everyone. Finally, we didn't mess it up this time. I think I'm the last one to speak, but I'm super excited to participate. So my name is Martyna Kowalczyk. I am located in Dallas, Texas, and I've been an installer since 2016. But because of my love for renewable energy and solar, I've also started a YouTube channel. So you're very welcome to just scan the code and you can check out the content that I generate. I'm very much like EnergySage, with the goal of just educating people on what the benefits are. And just like Brian and Emily were talking, like in some cases, like if you live in Massachusetts, you might be wasting your money by adding a battery. So in my section today, I will be talking about 4 easy steps to properly size a battery. And so we'll talk bills, load, solar, and duration. So let's go to the first step. And this is something that's very, very important, whether you're looking for a battery or not, is share your bills with your installers. This is so, so important because, as you can see, like on the graph that's here on the screen, it shows a full 12 months of usage, right? It can show you how different winter, spring, and fall are from the summer. And this gives your installer an idea of what your daily usage is. So like you can see in the summertime, this person's bill used 54 kilowatt hours, but then in the wintertime, it was only 25 kilowatt hours. So the question that you're going to have to ask yourself, am I doing this for a power outage? And if so, when do these power outages happen, right? Because for example, I'm in Dallas, Texas. In 2021, we had that big winter storm. And personally, we lost power for 5 days straight. So it was Monday through Friday that we did not have power, right? And if you have gas heating, your usage might be lower. But if you have electric heating, all electric home, you might have really high bills in the wintertime. So whether you're looking into battery or solar only, sharing your bills with installer is extremely important. And I often hear from people that they don't want to share the personal data. So you can just snap like the graph that you can see on the screen right here, instead of like uploading the whole PDF. And also just remember that one bill is almost not enough because it just shows us 1 out of 12 months. So try to give us at least 3 to 6 months. If you can give us 12, you're only helping yourself. Okay, so step 1, share your bills. Let's go to step number 2. So this is going to be another question of what are we backing up, right? What is important to us? Are you in the South where HVAC is actually very important? Or are you in the northern states where the climate is much milder and you don't really need that much power for those critical times? But oftentimes also people have life-sustaining machines, or I will tell you, and this is a really good tip, oftentimes homeowners will forget to put their thermostat on their critical loads panel, which is ultimately what controls their HVAC. So you have your HVAC on your critical loads panel, but you forgot to put the thermostat on it and you can't really turn it on. So this is something that you have to talk to your installer about. And again, this is also where you can verify if the installer is a good choice or not. So you can look for those red flags. Are they asking me the right questions? But yes, step number 2 is going to be your critical loads. What are we backing up? Are we doing whole home backup or are we doing critical loads panel? Step number 3, and this one is, I have to say, oftentimes overlooked. And this is sizing your solar system to your battery backup, right? So you will have homeowners that will install 30 panels, 10, 12 kilowatt system, but they only add 1 battery. And if you're doing this because of net metering, you want to be able to see when you're using your power. So if your system is generating 20 kilowatt hours a day and you're exporting half of that to the grid, you want to have a battery that can take half of that usage daily so that at night you can rely on your battery, and then in the morning the process just starts over again, right? But then, you sometimes will see people that will have too small of a battery, so you're still ending up exporting. And then sometimes you'll have people that have too many batteries, which is not very common because batteries tend to be more expensive, obviously. But if you have that, then, if you can't power them with solar, what's the point of having it? So I guess the next step, or part of step 3, is just finding that perfect match and having your installer understand what is my consumption and when is my consumption, right? Okay, we can go to the next slide. There's the perfect match. All right, step number 4 is going to be, and this is the final step, is understanding the duration. And Emily talked about this too. So we have those short outages that are 30 minutes to a few hours, and those are systems that are designed to power essentials. And they're supposed to bridge that gap between those brief power outages, right? So you don't need a big storage. But then you have homeowners that are in areas where they experience prolonged power outages, like people in Florida that just experienced those 2 hurricanes. Those systems are going to be a little bit more comprehensive, and you want to be able to have a full daily energy consumption, critical loads, and then also think about a possibility of what if there's not sunshine, but what if it's raining for the next 5 days, right? Do I need to have a bigger battery because I might not be able to recharge it? Or a second option is, should I also look into a secondary backup in form of a portable or a standby generator? So those are the 4 easy steps. I do have a full video on like how to properly size a battery, so you can definitely look into my YouTube channel regarding that. And then when it comes to your battery options, so you're going to have really 2 options, right? You're going to have your AC coupled battery and your DC coupled battery. The AC coupled battery, and as you can see on the screen here, it basically means that your solar panels, they have their own inverter, and then it powers the home, and then your battery has its own inverter. This option is very, very popular with your Enphase systems or SolarEdge systems in some cases too, where you already have a system at home and you just want to add a battery. So you're going to retrofit a battery that's going to be AC coupled. And an option here is like a Franklin battery or Enphase battery. And then the second option is going to be the more popular, that's becoming pretty much the standard right now, is going to be your DC coupled battery. And as you can see here, your solar panels and your battery are both connected to one inverter. And what that means, because solar panels generate DC, direct current, and your battery stores power in DC, also direct current. But your home, our home, uses AC current. So there has to be a conversion of power somewhere. So in a DC coupled battery system, you can see that you generate power in DC, and if your home doesn't need that power, it can go straight into the battery, which means that it avoids some of the efficiency losses during that trip from AC to DC, etc. And those options are going to be your obviously Tesla Powerwall 3 now, also EP Cube, SMA and Fronius are coming out with batteries as well, or with hybrid systems. But it does appear that the hybrids are definitely the new standard and just provide a much simpler design. So I think this is it. Let's see if we have any more. This is just a bigger version of the photos. And I think the last part is from an installer to a homeowner, because I'm also a homeowner who has had solar on 3 homes so far. One that I grew up with, my first home, and now also my rental property. So what I really want to tell you as the homeowner is talk to the installer. EnergySage is wonderful because they're so invasive, right? You are able to see and research people instead of somebody knocking on your door and getting into your house and crossing your boundaries. But you want to talk to the people on the platform. You want to check their reviews. You want to ask for references, check for any red flags, see if you even like them. I often say we buy from people that we like. And I think it's really, really important that you feel comfortable and you have that good gut feeling about your installer. Now, the second thing to look out for, and I think this one is very, very crucial for your satisfaction, and that is that you invite, like after you review the installers and you talk to, let's say, your top 3 choices, invite them over for a survey. This is very important because, like Brian and Emily were talking about, different homes have different setups. You might want to have your battery right next to your meter, or you might want to have it in your garage on the opposite wall, which can ultimately raise the price. And you want to make sure that before you select the installer, you have your bottom line figured out with no surprises. And this is again where you can kind of test and see who knows what they're doing and who does not. And then the final step is going to be your contract review. So after you talk to those 2 to 3 installers, ask for a contract, because salespeople are salespeople. They will say whatever they want to say, oftentimes just to seal the deal. But if it's not in writing, it did not happen. So if they are promising a warranty for 25 years, you want to see that in writing. So review your top 3 contract picks. And I think if you do these 3 things at the end, you're preventing yourself from spending too much money and basically just being happy with your purchase. Just like however many percent was it, Emily, 70 or 90%? 90%.
Yeah, 90.
You want to be part of that 90%. I think this is it for me. Yes, so again, you can scan the code and see some of the YouTube content that I've done. Yep, I think that's it. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Martina and Emily and Brian. It is now everyone's favorite time to submit your questions. I'm sure you all have some burning questions about resiliency and solar batteries after this. So the Q&A chat is open. If you want to submit some of your questions, we will try to get to as many of them as we can. Our first question is for Emily. And the question is, how long does it take to see savings from a solar battery?
That's a great question. And the answer is it really depends. If you live in an area, like we explained before, if you live in an area with time of use rates or without one-to-one net metering, you could see savings pretty quickly. And the same thing with good incentives. Some incentive programs can put money back into your pocket pretty quickly. But if you're getting a battery for resiliency, the financial benefit can really depend. It usually comes from avoiding the potential costs associated with outages, like spoiled food or home damage, lost wages, etc. We cover more in an article about how much you can save with batteries and a separate article about how much power outages cost. So we can send those along in the chat.
Perfect. Great. Thanks, Emily. Our next question is for Martina. It is, how do I maximize the efficiency and lifespan of my solar battery? And if you have any maintenance tips or settings to optimize performance?
There we go. I got to unmute myself to talk. So as far as the battery maintenance, there shouldn't be much if you're going with a very high quality product, right? So the major brands are gonna, they build into their system not to deplete the battery below, let's say 20%, right? So you can use your battery for daily consumption without worrying about it, and just make sure to read the warranty papers, right? Is there a limit on the cycles? Oftentimes though, those cycles are over 6,000. So you're gonna be super fine. So I would not worry too much about warranty. The only thing that I could say here, well, I guess I can answer that in another question that's right here. So
Okay. Thanks, Martina. And our next question is for Brian. The question is, what are the most common mistakes that homeowners make when they purchase a solar battery?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the best place to start is that one of the most common or biggest mistakes that you can make is thinking that you and your family need a battery when you actually don't. We touched on it earlier, but if you live in an area where you have a generous net metering program, like us folks here in Massachusetts, and you do not experience frequent extended outages, odds are you're going to be just fine by installing solar, knowing that you can always retrofit a battery to that system later on, should you decide to. Some other common mistakes that people often make, underestimating your energy needs. Martina, I think, touched on that. It's such a critical component, not only to battery storage and properly configuring that, but also for properly sizing your solar system. Choosing the wrong battery size, not considering any of your local utilities rate structure, or failing to ask about the total cost, right? Truly getting an understanding of what you're going in all in terms of pricing. So it's definitely important to ensure that, and also compatibility with any existing solar that folks might have. And you want to check the warranties on that too.
Great, thanks, Brian. I have a question for Emily. It's, can you discuss how a bi-directional charger and an EV play into the solar storage equation with solar panels and solar batteries?
It's a really good question. So far, I would say bidirectional chargers are still really in their infancy, at least Martina, correct me if I'm wrong, but I really haven't seen very many that are actually available on the market yet. What I have heard, so in a future state, I think there is something to be said about being able to just use your EV to back up your home. It's worth noting that obviously every time you discharge your battery, you're going to be depleting it, and it will, drain it over time. Batteries don't last forever, which I know is another question that we can touch on in a second here, but
I can add a little bit to it, because I've done a few installation, if you don't mind, Emily, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it has been a challenging subject for sure because Ford F-150 has come out with their bidirectional product. The problem is that we've gotten it, we've installed it, but there's no service whatsoever. So I would honestly focus on providing backup for your home that will ultimately be easily accessed by your vehicle. So Powerwall is definitely going to have some sort of connection with their electric vehicles, because what we've seen is that battery companies do not want to pair with other companies because who's going to be liable for damaging the battery if that happens, right? So as of right now, I do not think there's anything available that's valuable to your funds. But hopefully, if you choose one of the top products for batteries, I think you're in good hands for that to be an available capacity on your product.
One other thing I've heard is there's a battery right now that exists called Franklin, and you can use it to actually plug your EV directly in it. And so you can charge, if your battery runs out of capacity, you can charge it with your EV battery if you're in an extended power outage or something. So that is kind of an interim solution right now too.
Our next question is sort of in that same vein. How long do batteries typically last during an outage? And how long will a typical battery installation last before they need to be replaced? Martina, I don't know if you want to take this one.
Sure. I was actually starting to type literally the answer for David. So it's a very hard question to answer because it's almost like I'm going to give you 10 gallons of water. How long will that last you, right? It really depends on how you're going to use your power. And oftentimes people will want to do whole home backup and they'll put their air conditioning on the backup. But if you didn't know, a 3 or a 5-ton air conditioning unit will take 3 to 5 kilowatt hours of energy per hour of use. So if you do run your air conditioning for 2 hours, you might completely deplete your battery, right? So it really depends on how you're going to use your power. The great thing about getting storage is that you can prepare yourself and your family for that situation. So you can simulate a power outage, right? And see, hey, how long is this battery going to last us? And then you can kind of see how to prepare best for those bad weather events. And then as far as the timing of how long those products are gonna, as far as replacing it in the future. So what we've seen in electric vehicle batteries, which are very, very similar, oftentimes the same to home batteries, is that they actually outlast their warranty. I personally drive a 6-year-old electric vehicle that had 200-mile range at the very beginning, and it's still at 198 miles. So the depletion is not as bad as manufacturers think, but of course they have to prepare themselves. So I say you got at least 10 years, and I would not worry about it 1 second before then.
Awesome. Thank you, Martina. Our next question is from Leo. The question is, can batteries be installed inside? Is it safe, or do they need to be outside? Whoever wants to take this one.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Martina.
Yeah, you can go ahead, Martina.
So who's taking it?
Do you want to take it? Or I mean, I'm happy to as well, but
I thought Brian was like, I'm taking it.
No, I said you could go ahead, jump in there.
Okay, I will answer that one, but then Emily and Brian take the next two. So they can be installed in both outside or inside. You have to look whether they're indoor and outdoor rated, obviously. Most major companies are both. The problem, or not the problem, but the recommendation becomes if you're in an area that gets really, really cold or really, really hot, you want to protect it from the outside elements, right? So if you're in Texas, when we have 5 days of 18 degrees Fahrenheit, we tend to tell homeowners in an outage, you want to have that battery in an enclosed space where it can be kept warm. And then you also don't want it to be exposed to direct sunlight. It's an expensive equipment, so you want to protect it, is what I often tell homeowners. But if you're in the milder climate, totally fine to be outside. Was that the question? Did I answer the question? Yeah.
yeah.
On that same vein, We've gotten this question from quite a few viewers. What advice do you have for sizing a battery system?
I can jump in there. I'll give Martyna a chance to catch her breath. We touched on that a little bit earlier. When it comes to sizing appropriately a battery configuration for your home, the first thing you need to consider is what are the most critical loads that I want to be able to power in the event of an outage, and for what duration, right? So your installer can certainly help you scope that, but you should come to that conversation with an understanding of these are the most important things in my home that I want powered in the event of an outage. There are some folks who maybe have medical devices that they have to consider. Some folks like me, as long as my refrigerator and Wi-Fi router are running, I could probably last quite a while. So it's really dependent on each individual situation, but the best way to start thinking about how many batteries you may need is by having that internal understanding of this is what I want powered for this duration, and your installer will help guide that conversation and make sure you have the right configuration.
And I'll just mention there's really two different things to look at when it comes to this. There's the power output and the capacity of the battery. So the capacity is really talking about how long you want to power devices for, and the output is how many devices you want to power at once. You know, like Martyna mentioned, the Powerwall 3 is really popular. It's a great battery. That one has very high power output. So a lot of people can power their entire home with a Powerwall 3. Everything, all of the loads that are existing in your home, but the issue is that its capacity isn't super high. So if you're powering all those loads at once, you're going to drain it really quickly.
Okay, this is a good one. Can you speak about any risks associated with batteries, especially lithium-ion, lithium phosphate, and how safe are these to have in our homes?
That's a great question. Honestly, we don't see, there's been very low incidences of things actually going wrong. I would also mention that a lot of battery manufacturers are moving to a chemistry that is more stable called lithium iron phosphate. So for example, the Tesla Powerwall 3, again, uses that battery chemistry. The Powerwall 2 uses a different type of chemistry called nickel manganese cobalt. And that one, while still very safe, has is a little bit more prone to thermal runaway, which can potentially lead to issues, but it really, they're all very safe. The incident rates are extremely low. Martyna, I don't know if you have anything to add there, but.
No, I would say the same thing. And one thing that a lot of city jurisdiction, which is very important when you select a high quality installer, that they follow permitting and city requirements, and then they pass inspection. But most cities now require heat and fire detectors in garages when we install batteries, just for security reasons. But just like you said, LFP is so much safer. It's not very prone to thermal runaway and fires. Actual gas vehicles, ICE vehicles, are so much more prone to fires than the battery. So you guys are totally fine.
Great. Our next question is, does anyone run off of just a battery backup without having solar?
Yeah, I mean, that's also a great question. Certainly people have, I would say, increasingly been installing batteries as a replacement of generators. Some of the things that, Brian mentioned, when you're looking at them head to head, there's a lot of reasons to go with a battery instead of a generator. And if you don't have a great roof for solar, maybe you don't need solar. Obviously the downside there is you're not going to be saving money in the same way as you would with solar, but you still can save some money with time of use rates, and certainly with power outages, but you won't be able to recharge your battery in the event of a long duration outage like you would with solar. So in that case, maybe you want to choose a battery that you can kind of like Franklin, that you can also charge with an EV if you need to get more storage capacity out of it. You're likely going to need a much bigger battery setup to continue to power your outage for a long duration if you don't have those solar panels to recharge them. But it's certainly possible, and it really can make sense in some cases.
Our next question is for Martina, and it is, what portion of your battery customers decide to back up their whole home versus just critical equipment?
So that's a really good question. In Texas, we really shoot for whole home backup. And that's just because we like to have control of the different parts of the home that we want to back up. Oftentimes, homeowners will start with one battery with a plan of adding more. So they want to set up their whole home, or they want to set up their battery so it's ready to take whole home. But I would say 9 out of 10 homeowners that I deal with will do a whole home backup.
Also, I'll just mention, I saw a question about energy management systems / smart panels in the chat. If you can't back up your whole home, but want the flexibility to be able to power all of the loads, but not all at the same time, that's a really good option. They're not super popular right now, but I could see as battery attachment rate is increasing, they probably will gain in popularity. And in some cases, you already have to replace your electrical panel anyways to go solar if you don't have enough amperage. But so they can be a really good option to provide that flexibility and be able to make sure that you can power the most critical devices, but also you have choice to power some more comfort devices if you want to and you have extra capacity.
Our next question is, are there any disadvantages to leaving a battery fully charged to avoid cycling?
I would say no. It's like buying a car and not driving it. You want to be using it, right? You want to get your money out of it, right?
Anything else to add?
Oh,
Okay. Martina, I think you were kind of speaking to this from your experiences in Texas, but this question is, how do these battery packs perform in extreme temperatures?
Yeah, so this is again where you really want to shoot for a good manufacturer, because we've had a few customers that called us from, we call them orphan systems, where the product was not really a good product and the battery just stopped working because the heating mechanism did not heat up the battery in the cold temperature. And I do have photos of my technicians going out with hair dryers to heat up a battery for it to start working. So this is where, again, you're spending your hard-earned money. You do not want to save $500, $1,000 going cheap just because of that, because you might end up, just like Emily was saying, if there is a power outage and you don't, like you have burst pipes, you might lose thousands of dollars in replacement costs for your home or repairs. So I would say this is where you really want to shoot for a high quality product. Period. That's it.
great point.
This is a really good question. Is there any impact to my homeowner's insurance by installing a battery in the garage or elsewhere in my house?
Should
I
I
think
go
that-
for it?
I think that's going to be situation dependent. One of the pieces of the guidance that I always give to homeowners when they're considering solar plus battery storage, one of the things that should be on your checklist is you should contact your homeowner's insurance carrier, because that very much, I don't think there's a uniform answer, and the rest of the group can chime in, but it's always worth contacting them because it does vary.
Okay, our next question is, with battery technology making significant progress over the past few years, do we have an idea on how much cheaper or better batteries are likely to become in the near future?
That's a great question. I don't think we have exact insight on, how prices are going to change in the future. Obviously, the market it's volatile. It's hard to tell exactly how it's going to move, but I can say, like we mentioned earlier, prices are the lowest we've ever seen on EnergySage right now. And like Martina and I were talking about, LFP battery technology is in a really good spot right now. It's super safe. It lasts a really long time. So I would say it's better to install it now than wait, because you're going to potentially lose out on financial savings. You're potentially not going to be protected from power outages that could do damage to your home. So there's really no good reason to wait.
This question is, how long is the process to install a battery from research to finding an installer to having it actually up and running in your home?
I can say this is a very hard question to answer because it really depends where you live.
Yeah,
Some people that live in a countryside may have no jurisdiction over them and they just need to submit for a utility connection, and that may be able to get you a battery within a week. But then oftentimes if you have to go through a city and getting a permit for it, which I highly, highly recommend, if you already have solar and you're retrofitting a battery, always add a permit to it. It can take anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks. The actual installation part might take at least, I would say, 2 days all the way to 5 days, right? And here's one thing. You don't want to be choosing an installer that tells you I can get it done in 1 day. You don't want them rush. You want them to do all the things right.
great advice.
Are there any insights about battery arrangement if an EV is also in play in my future?
Do you have thoughts on that, Martyna?
I'm sorry, I'm here like answering questions because I really want to get to all of them. Can you repeat the question and I will answer it, I promise.
No worries. Do you have any insight about battery arrangement if an EV is also in their future?
I think we don't need to complicate it too much. A hybrid system or an AC coupled battery is going to be just fine. Yeah, it's actually very simple. All of it is really simple. It's just electricity. It almost needs to just flows like water and piping system, right? So I would not worry about it too much. No.
This next question is, can TOU programs alone make a battery worthwhile? Like charge it at night, discharge it during the day?
I can answer that too.
Go
Okay,
for it.
I'll jump in. So here's the thing. When it comes to deciding whether a battery makes sense financially for you, you have to see what your charges are during peak time and during off-peak time. If that difference is very significant and you can charge your battery from solar and then use it while your electricity is 20, 30 cents, it will start making sense. If you don't have a big jump, like in California and San Diego, I've heard people pay from 30 to 80 cents. Like this is a no-brainer to add a battery in those instances. In Texas, I pay 19 cents and I get paid 15 cents back. It's a 5-cent difference. It almost makes sense to add more solar than to add a battery, but I also want resiliency, right? I want to be able to be prepared for power outages. So I hope that answers the question properly.
And even if you don't have solar and you can charge your battery from the grid when electricity is cheaper, if there is a big enough like delta in those prices, it can make sense financially, especially if you have really good incentive programs available to you. So it really is location dependent and depending on your utility company, but there are instances where it can make sense.
All right. Is there a benefit of the AC coupled battery over the DC coupled battery, or is it the other way around?
Martyna kind of talked about this, but I think like the biggest benefit of choosing an AC coupled system is that you can easily retrofit it to an existing solar panel system. Also, like she mentioned, if you want micro inverters on your roof because you have significant shading, you need an AC coupled battery. But there aren't benefits in terms of like how efficient they run and how much power you get out of them. You're definitely going to have a more efficient system if it's DC coupled.
And there was another question that we can kind of jump on to, which basically said, I have microinverters, what are my options? In an instance like that, your best bet or really only affordable bet is going to be AC coupling the battery. And from what I know, that's going to be your Enphase, your Franklin, just like Emily said, but also Powerwall 3 can be AC coupled, and so does EP Cube by Canadian. So there's still plenty of options.
Yeah, a lot like you said can be AC or DC coupled, like the Tesla Powerwall 3 and some other options. So you might not have to compromise on the actual battery.
Okay, and I think this might be our last question just based on time. It is, what battery chemistry do you recommend? Or is there a certain specific type of battery that you recommend?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like we talked about earlier, LFP is certainly what I'd recommend over NMC. So again, it's lithium iron phosphate versus nickel manganese cobalt. There also is a sort of new battery chemistry that's entering the market called LTO, or I think it's lithium titanate oxide. There's a battery company called Velara that offers that. It's it lasts longer, which is good. It has no thermal runaway issues, so there's really no fire risk at all, but I will say it's a lot more expensive. So if you're worried about upfront cost, it might not be the best choice for you. Generally, the Tesla Powerwall 3 is what we're really seeing taking off right now, and I think that's for a good reason. It's a really, really good battery.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. And thank you to all three of you and Martyna for joining us and for sharing all of your wonderful knowledge. And thank you for everyone who attended and submitted all of your great questions. If you would like to get in touch with any of our speakers, we have QR codes on the screen now, so you can scan those to find their contact information. We'll also be sending an email to everyone after this webinar closes with their contact information, as well as a recording to this webinar. So if you want to rewatch it, show it to a friend, if you missed any of the questions, you will have that. So that's great. And we also have some more information on EnergySage.com. We have a bunch of content on solar batteries and a bunch of different solar questions. You can also email us at solarteam@EnergySage.com if we didn't get a chance to answer your question today. Thank you all so much for joining. Hope you have a good rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.